When we last left our heroes. Hey there, we play D&D at Morgan's Comics on Thursday nights where we're abiding by all COVID restrictions, making sure that people wear masks, that we are doing social distancing, and limiting people at the table. So last time we left our characters, chaos had ensued in the village of Orlane. Two of the characters had killed law enforcement, and the Golden Grain Inn, which is one of the main methods of money revenue inside of the village, had burned to the ground. The characters at this point are worried that they're going to be wanted felons, so they go in disguise in order to make sure that no one recognizes them or apprehends them for their crimes. All the while, they now know that there's a tunnel underneath the Golden Grain Inn that seems to lead into a dark cavernous area. The characters, thinking to themselves that this may be the entrance to Explicata Defilus's lair, the leader of this cult, decide to visit it later on. Now the characters are in disguise, but they want to make sure that no one recognizes them and stops their plans. So they want to wait till nightfall in order to investigate the underseedy belly of the Golden Grain Inn. Now in the meantime, they have an entire day ahead of them, so they try and figure out what else they have to cross off their to-do list. Knowing that they have this metal box from the jeweler, they immediately contact Bombador the Dwarf, using one of the calling cards that he gave them to summon him. Now, as they're waiting for the dwarf to appear, the carrier hawk that they had borrowed from the mayor in order to send a message to the neighboring town has returned, and it's brought a message of its own. The players read it, and it's from Gertrude, the healer inside of Hotchik, the town that they previously were at, and she tells them that some of the men from the Invincible Overlord, he's one of the nobles that runs the territory in that area, has sent soldiers to their compound. And when the soldiers were there, they learned about Orlane and what was happening in the town, but they didn't really show much interest in it. However, when one of the townsfolk told them about the 4 heroes that had stopped the goblin raid, now the soldiers are interested. These soldiers start to question a lot of the townsfolk at this area, and they talk to the blacksmith in which the heroes had helped in the first session. Gertrude tells them in the note that these soldiers are on their way to Orlane, and they're going to be there in 2 days. So now the heroes have a time constraint in order to deal with the problem here before potentially another problem comes to their doorstep. You see, in the thief's past, he actually killed a member of his family in a very heated confrontation, and so now he's running from the law. So if these soldiers come to the town and they recognize him, then he could be put away for a very long time. As the characters are discussing amongst themselves what these soldiers probably want from them, they hear a knock at the door, and they open it up to find Bombador the Dwarf, who's magically appeared. With the dwarf inside, the players hand him the metal box that they retrieved from the jewelers. And when he opened it up, he looked at the contents and he said that their contract was fulfilled. However, at this point, the players know that they're going to be in for a long fight if they're going to be entering into a dungeon. And so they want to gather as much supplies as they can get. For one, the warlock, who had previously been cursed, still has this curse that is making all of his strength rolls at disadvantage. So he wants to see if the dwarf can help him with that. The other party members are listing off things that they'd like on their list as well. Things like crossbow bolts, or a net, or different pounds of salt. All the while, I'm asking the characters, why do you want salt? And one of them says, maybe we'll be able to throw it into the water of the swamp and kill some of the troglodytes. All the while, I'm thinking to myself, oh great, now I gotta look up the pH level and acidity of swamps. The dwarf considers their list, and he tells them that it'll take a little bit of time for him to figure out the prices of it, but he tells them that he'll probably be able to help them with everything on it. And as the players are working out their Amazon wish list, the warlock looks outside and he notices that many of the villagers are gathering around the town square, and in front of them are 6 individual coffins. The party members at this point are reviewing their kill list, and they're trying to figure out how many people they actually did kill in the last session. Suspicious at this point, they decide to go to the funeral that the mayor is holding for the slain individuals and see if they can maybe solve this mystery. As the players attend this funeral, they listen to the mayor's eulogy as he talks about all the slain individuals and how they contributed to the town in their own way. He talks about the 2 police officers serving and protecting the town, and he talks about the individuals who ran the inn, who cooked and bartended, and overall went through the books in order to keep that place flowing. And as the mayor is talking about each individual person who died, the players are trying to obscure their face and covering their head. When the mayor talks about the constable and his deputy, the rest of the townsfolk who are attending the funeral decide to speak out, and they start demanding answers. They know that the constable and his men weren't inside of the Golden Grain Inn, so they wonder why he was killed, what happened to him. The players at this point are squirming out of their chairs and trying to get out of there. The mayor, looking down at his bodyguard and seeing that his bodyguard doesn't want him to say anything, decides to tell the townsfolk something he should have a long time ago. The mayor divulges to the town that an evil has gripped Orlane and that cult members have infiltrated the town and are attacking it from within. The mayor tells the townsfolk that he is issuing a curfew so that people can stay indoors and they can be safe. And he tells them that he will get to the bottom of this evil and make sure to cleanse it from their village. But at this point, the mayor potentially has painted a target on his back. He has ousted the cult in front of the entire town, and the players realize that he might need protection from now on. When the players return back to their house, they talk to Bombador the dwarf to see if maybe he can offer aid to the mayor. He agrees, and he tells them that he's also collected a lot of the items that they need. One of the specialty items was for the warlock. It was a potion to cure his curse. The warlock, so happy to be done with his curse, pops off the cork and downs the entire potion. He feels vigor just flow through his veins and just this lethargy wash off of him. And a strength that he hasn't felt in days suddenly courses into his body. Now, he's a warlock, so he's a magic user. He does not use strength that much. But in the past couple days, he has used strength a lot in order to break open cellar doors, to carry people upstairs, so he might actually need this later on. He starts showing off, flexing the guns, and everyone, trying to build him up a little bit, says, ooh, ah. Feeling pumped up, he falls onto the ground to do a push-up, and he rolls a 13, so, with his knees down, he's able to get a good one in. Now, as it is with this merchant, nothing comes cheap. And since they can't pay with these items with gold, they decide to take on another quest. The dwarf tells them that if they can secure the fangs of this snake-like creature, Explicita Defilis, and bring them to him, he will count their debt paid. Now, he takes out contracts and he tells them, hey, as long as you sign it on the dotted line with your own blood, we've got a done deal. The warlock's like, yeah, no problem, and he signs it, but the ranger's a little bit skeptical and she asks to read the contract. She picks up the contract and she rolls high enough on her intelligence, so as she's reading, she finds out if they try and squirm out of the deal in any way, Bombador will send them to one of the 9 rings of hell where they'll burn in sulfur and ash and brimstone for all of eternity. All the characters at this point are like, yeah, no big deal, and they all sign, except the thief. The thief isn't interested in giving up his blood, even though he's lost it previously to some of the cultists. So him and the dwarf go into another room and they discuss a different deal between themselves, but the other players don't know what that deal is. Now, all geared up and under the cover of darkness, the party members decide to infiltrate the bottom of the Golden Grain Inn to see if they can make their way into what they presume is a dungeon. Very stealthily, they clear a lot of the rubble that's obscuring the root cellar, and they make their way into the tunnel, the mouth of this cave. As they're moving, they smell the musty odor and the leftover scent of smoke and ash, and they also smell something else, decay of some sort that's coming from deep within the tunnel. The thief, who's taking point, is checking for traps, and he hears a screech that's coming from down the tunnel, but he doesn't know in which direction. You see, as they approach a larger area, the tunnel itself branches into 3 different paths. The druid, wanting to investigate and see if anything has happened in the immediate area recently, sees that there are marks as if something has been dragged from the left area to the middle row, and it continues in that middle section of the hallway. Curious as to what's making this dragging motion into the sand, they decide to go forward into the middle tunnel. The tunnel continues for about 30 feet, and then it opens up into a large cavernous area. And in the middle, a large statue of a snake with a woman's face on it. At this point, the warlock, who has recently been cured of his curse, is like, nope, no way at all. The party members all decide that it's probably best if they don't touch this thing, but they do investigate it and run a little arcana to make sure if they can understand if this one's trapped the same way. They don't feel any arcana in it, but they notice that it's different than the jade statue that was inside of the temple. This one seems to be made of brass, and it's got 2 ivory tusks that are coming out as fangs. The thief is looking at those ivory tusks and he's like, what if I just used a pickaxe against it? And as this is happening, all the party members just stare at him. So leaving the statue alone, they continue forward to the other end of this cavernous area, and they find 2 double doors, one of them slightly ajar. The ranger, moving forward very stealthily, sneaks a peek inside of the door and sees 3 humanoid creatures that make chills run down her spine. These creatures are pale gray, devoid of any hair on them. They've got large fangs and jettisoning out claws, and they seem to be hunched over this pile in front of them. And as one of them looks up, the ranger can see that he's holding on to the arm of a human and just tearing away from the flesh. The party members discuss amongst themselves, and the ranger recognizes these creatures as undead ghouls. They're like scavengers that exist in deep tunnels that seek out flesh in any form and try to devour it, even if it's living or dead. Now the ranger seems a little shell-shocked, and everyone's asking her, what's going on, are you okay? And she tells a little bit of her backstory that when a catastrophe had befelled her village, and after they were trying to recuperate from this, the undead swarm emerged and entered into her village, killing a lot of the inhabitants. So she has a personal vendetta against them, and she wants to be the first one to draw blood. And as they're making a plan, they hear that the crunching sound inside the room has stopped. The ranger, not wanting to lose her opportunity, stealthily enters inside of the room and looks around. The 3 huddled forms that were previously in the middle of the room have now disappeared. And as she looks around and scans with her eyes, she feels something drop on her shoulder. She looks up and she sees 3 creatures that are staring down at her, their eyes glowing in the dim light. She readies her bow and she looses it, hitting one of them directly in the stomach, and it falls down at her, and she's able to use her dexterity to move out of the way in time so it doesn't fall directly on top of her. And at this point, the rest of the party members jump into action. The ranger, moving to the corner of the room, tries to protect herself as another ghoul jumps down from the ceiling, landing on top of her. Another ghoul falls down and blocks the doorway, stopping anyone from entering inside. And at that time, the warlock decides that he needs to rush in to aid the ranger, so he takes the attack of opportunity, but he casts a spell on himself first. This dark purple protective shell starts to emerge and materialize around his armor, and as he runs in, the ghoul swipes at him, and when it makes contact, it starts to get this frost that emerges onto its hand, damaging it with cold damage. The warlock makes it inside, and the one ghoul that was on the ground with the arrow in it stands up and readies an attack against him. The ghoul swipes his claws at the warlock, and in doing so, receives the same frost damage against it. But when it makes contact, it does damage on the warlock, and the warlock has to roll a Constitution saving throw. The warlock succeeds, but he feels for a second that this stinging numbness circulates throughout his body, but he's able to brush it off. Now the druid and the rogue are still in the mouth of this entrance, and they have a ghoul in front of them who's blocking the doorway, not allowing them to gain access and help their friends. So they attack it and they do minimal damage, but the ghoul itself runs and charges directly at the rogue, grappling him, pushing him against this statue of this giant snake creature, and it grabs the head of the rogue and shoves it back into the statue. When the back of the rogue's head hits this statue, he sees stars for a second, and as he looks up, he sees that the statue's eyes that are looking down suddenly light up bright red. The rogue suddenly feels like a lot of the different items that are on his person, all his different equipment, is suddenly being drawn towards this statue, as if some sort of force is pulling it, directing it towards the statue. The ghoul that was attacking the ranger suddenly jumps on top of her, grappling her to the ground, and starts to bite into her shoulder. And at this point, it's doing a lot of damage to her. The ranger reaches up, grabs her daggers, and sinks it into the back of the creature, but it's not enough, and the creature bites down on her again, knocking her unconscious. The warlock who's inside of the room sees this happen to his friend and he's desperate to help her, but he has got his own ghoul to deal with. So he takes up his Morning Star and he slams it down, making contact, doing massive damage. All the while, the other ghoul that's pinning the rogue against the statue is now biting down on his neck. And as the druid sees this, he readies a bow, looses an arrow, and hits him directly in the back of the head, killing the ghoul. However, similar to the other items on the rogue, the arrow itself is now magnetically stuck to the statue. And as the rogue is trying to break free of all his items to get free of this magnetic pull, he looks down and he sees another symbol on the statue that starts to glow red. The rogue starts to disrobe from all his metal items and he breaks free of this magnetic charge and he yells to the other party members, telling them that something's about to happen. And as he does, the warlock looks up and starts to see that the ceiling above him is moving. Pieces of rock and gravel are starting to break free of the ceiling, and at first he thinks that maybe it's going to cave in or slowly crush them, but then he looks up and he sees a stalactite, a single one that's in the middle of this room that starts to move. The ghoul that's fighting the warlock sees this too and starts to make a beeline straight for the door. However, as he does, he comes in contact with the druid and they grapple each other, neither one giving an inch as they keep their ground. The warlock, realizing that the ranger is close to death and has this creature that's biting down on her, runs directly at the ghoul and tackles him off of the ranger. And now, he's free from her unconscious body. The rogue, now free from his metal constraints, runs directly into the room looking for a weapon of any kind, and he picks up a jagged piece of bone, sinking it into the back of the ghoul that was fighting the druid. The druid, now free from his grapples, runs straight inside of the room and heals the ranger, bringing her back up. And as she comes to and she looks up at the ceiling, she sees this stalactite reaching out with these two tentacles and this giant maw of jaws that emerges at the tip. The warlock who's fighting this ghoul looks up and sees this image on the ceiling, and he says that all too famous escape line. And our heroes dash as fast as they can and book it out of that room. The ghoul, however, isn't fast enough, and as the druid is exiting the room, he turns around and sees just in time as the ghoul is grabbed at both ends by these tentacles, ripped in half, and pulled towards the ceiling. The heroes, realizing that that's probably going to be their fate if they stick around, decide to test their luck against this statue and try to move as fast as they can away from it. The rogue goes first and goes to the statue, trying to release any of his metal weapons to see if he can bring them with him. And as he does, he rolls a strength check, and he rolls a natural 1. He feels this magnetic pull tug at his side satchel, and when he looks down at it, his animal companion, Raffles, gets wrenched out and pulled over and pinned against the statue because of the metal inside of his harness. The warlock goes next, and at this point he's wearing a new set of armor, scale mail, and as he tries to run past it, the magnetic pull is too strong and it drags him with his armor against it, pinning him against the statue as well. The ranger goes third, and she's able to move as fast and as quick as she can, trying to subvert a lot of this magnetic pull, and when she rolls, she does so successfully, making it to the other end of the tunnel. The druid, who's last in line, looks back behind his shoulder and he sees this upside down sentient stalactite that's finished devouring this ghoul look directly at him. And this being, the roper, reaches out with his tentacles ready to grasp him as well. Coming up with the only action he can think about, he reaches up with his animal friendship ring and he casts fear against the roper. The stalactite creature retracts his tentacles and leans back in fear of this druid who now has this awing power. The druid, now seeing this as his chance, books it towards the exit and tries to make it past the magnetic field of this particular statue. But when he makes it through, he doesn't roll well enough and he starts getting sucked towards its magnetic pull as well. The warlock, saying that he has a plan, is a little sad at this moment because he's looking down at his new set of armor and he's stroking it and telling it little sweet nothings about how he will miss it, and then he casts Misty Step. And he teleports immediately away from that towards the entrance of this tunnel. And as he looks down at his new reappeared body, he's still wearing the armor and he rejoices. But this victory doesn't last long, because when he looks back, he sees two of his companions that are stuck to this statue, and he thinks to himself that he's going to have to do something in order to disrupt this statue. Remembering what happened last time when he attacked the statue in the temple, an audible groan comes from the player, and he lifts up his hand, getting ready an Eldritch Blast. And at this moment, the player who plays the ranger jumped out of her seat because she remembered an item that she previously had, this Scroll of Sanctuary, and she uses it and casts it onto the warlock. The warlock, now protected from the scroll, looses an Eldritch Blast and makes contact, hitting the statue directly in the back. And as he does, it chips the statue, just disrupting the magnetic field for just an instant. But at the same time, as dark shadow emerges from the statue and goes directly towards him at high speed. But before it makes contact, it stops inches away from him, and he can feel the dark necrotic energy that's trying to get him. And then it just dissipates into the ether. The druid and the rogue, realizing they only have one action to save their belongings before this statue kicks into gear again, reach out and grab as many items as they can. The rogue grabs his animal companion Raffles and his short sword and runs. All the while, the druid grabs his ring of animal friendship and his spear and takes off as well. And as they run towards the entrance, they look back and they see these two large tentacles reach down through the doorway, pulling the door apart and caving in the area. The characters claw their way out of the bowels of this root cellar, and then when they finally hit the surface, they lay down exhausted against the charred remains of the Golden Grain Inn. As all the characters stare up into the night sky, panting, the warlock looks at them and tells them, "Guys, we've only cleared one room." A somber feeling washes through the party as they start to imagine what else could be in the depths of these tunnels. And as they try to get a short rest and think about this, they're all too tense at this moment. The rogue, laying up against the charred remains of a door, starts petting his animal companion Raffles, and he tells a story to the rest of the party members. He paints this picture of his past when he was an orphan and he had no caregivers, no one to look after him and no one to take care of him. How he wandered around this large city totally alone, and at one point he came across this nest of different ferrets that were getting attacked by a cobra. Several ferrets were already dead around this nest, and the mother who was trying to protect her young was gravely wounded by the snake. The young rogue, gathering his courage, took a stick and attacked the snake, finally killing it. But the mother of these ferrets died because of her wounds. As the young rogue bent to one knee and looked inside of the nest, he saw one lone ferret who survived this massacre that crawled over and embraced him in his hands. The rogue then took it upon himself to take care of this creature, and it became his companion ever since that day, really the only thing that he could rely on and trust. And as the rogue is spinning this story, he tells his companions that he wants them to know how important Raffles is to him. But he also wants them to know how grateful and how much he trusts them now for everything they've done for him and for Raffles. And that's where we ended session 6. Thanks for listening. If you're interested in D&D or you want to know a little bit more about role-playing, please stop on by to Morgan's Comics, where we can try and help you out find a lot of the resources that you need in order to start your own D&D experience. Tune in next week when we learn what other dastardly things could be waiting in the depths of these tunnels for the adventurers. Everyone be safe out there. Bye now.